In this exercise, we're going to be creating a geometric design using step and repeat in Illustrator. This is a great technique for doing this because it's a way to create a lot of complexity in a very quick way. It also gives you that kind of geometric mathematical look because you're applying a set of systematic transformations to an object, which gives you kind of that fractal look, which is very visually engaging. So I'm going to start by creating an ellipse. I'm going to hold down Shift to constrain that and make sure that it is a perfect circle. And I'm going to just draw it as a stroke, so no fill and a black stroke. And I'll turn down the stroke to 0.5 points, so it's really thin. Okay, then I'm going to select this and go up to Object, Transform, and I'm going to choose Scale. Okay, so whatever I type in here is going to make the circle shrink by that amount. So I'm going to type something pretty low. I'll try 97%. If I have preview on, it will show me the amount that it's transforming. And then instead of clicking OK, I'm going to click Copy so that it makes a copy and leaves the original. And then when I hit Command D to step and repeat, it will apply that same transformation to the previous shape. So if I keep clicking Command D a bunch of times, you can see I'm very quickly creating a very, very complex geometry. Okay, so that already looks pretty cool. If I select this and make a copy by holding down Option, I can also create some cool moire patterns. Moire is something that happens when there is a grid of objects that are just slightly offset. You get kind of this weird effect. Okay, so that's a really simple way to use step and repeat. Let me show you something a little more complex. I'm going to delete that circle. This time I'm going to draw a rectangle. I'll make a square by holding down Shift. And then once again, I'm going to go up to Object and Transform, but this time I'm going to do Transform Each. It's called that, by the way, because if you use this option on multiple objects, it will transform each one separately rather than all of them together. Transform Each has a bunch of options. It's almost like all the different transform functions kind of put together, which is one of the reasons I really like it. So if I wanted to do a scale and move and rotate all at the same time, I could do that in one step. So for scale, I'm going to go ahead and choose 97%. I'm not going to move it. I'll just, keep it where it is. But then I am going to rotate it, and I'll choose 3 degrees for that. If I turn on preview, I can kind of see what's happening. I'm going to turn down the angle just a little bit, so maybe 2 degrees. Okay, and then once again, I'm going to click Copy instead of OK. And then if I hit Step and Repeat, you can see that combination of scaling and rotating is creating a really interesting effect. Okay, so I'm going to delete all these except for the first object and show you one more thing. Select the square again, transform each, and then this time we'll do the same thing, but I'm going to click Scale, Strokes, and Effects. Okay, so I'm going to click that and do this again with the copy button. Okay, and if you just hold down Command D, it'll actually repeat that action a bunch of times. So the reason this one's a little bit different is because it's actually scaling down the stroke with the scaling of the object. So this outside shape is 0.5, but these very inside fine shapes, you can see the stroke got scaled way, way down. So it's getting much finer. So if you want, that type of effect, you want to make sure that button is clicked. Otherwise, all the strokes as you zoom in will still be the same thickness as the original stroke. Okay. So that's a really cool way to, again, just create some kind of geometric pattern. But there's actually a trick to do this a little bit faster, and it's in the Effects panel. So again, I'm going to delete this, and we'll do the same thing by going up to Effect and over to Distort and Transform, and then Transform. Make sure you're in the Illustrator section when you do this. Okay, so you can see that this is the same panel as transform each. But this works a little bit differently because I can make the copies by typing a numerical number right into this section. So if I choose the same values for angle and scale, okay, I'm going to turn off scales, strokes, and effects. And then I just type in a number of copies and click preview. You can see I can instantly see what that's going to look like. And as I, move the copies up or down, I can, instantly see what that is going to look like. Okay, and this works a little bit differently because it's actually an effect that's being applied. So if I click OK and take my selection tool, this is actually just one object. When I did the transform each, it was creating, 50 objects and each one was separate. But in this case, it's just the outer object. And if I go to my appearance panel, you can see that there's this effect that's being applied, which is the transform. Okay, so this is really nice because any modifications I make to the original shape will affect all the stuff inside. And I can also click and edit that effect for transform and change these values. So if I decide I instead want more of an angle, I'm going to click repeat or click on preview so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, I can scale that up and make changes to what I'm doing. Okay, or maybe I want to do some horizontal movement. Okay, that's going to move the spiral out as it goes. Again, that's going to edit the original effect on that shape. Okay, so I'm going to click cancel and I'll delete this. Let's try it with a few other shapes. You can do it with things like ellipses. Okay, and I'm going to move this back up to 0.5 stroke so I can see it. Same thing, I'm going to go to Effect, Distort and Transform, and Transform. Okay, so for circles, just rotating isn't really going to do anything unless there's something that is not symmetrical about the circle. So if I just, do 97 and apply the same type of rotation, choose 50 copies. Okay, it's just the same as the concentric circles because the rotation is not doing anything since a circle that's rotated is just going to look the same. But if I apply some kind of move, now you'll start to get that sort of spiral effect. And I'll add in more copies. So the combination of the movement and the rotation is doing something. Another thing you can do instead of moving is change the way you're scaling it. So if instead of scaling it evenly where the vertical and horizontal values are the same, if I instead just scale vertical, or excuse me, just scale horizontal but not vertical, again, it's going to create, an interesting effect. Okay, and as I increase the angle, you'll see this sort of spiral is coming into play. And if I do that in conjunction with some movement, there's some pretty interesting things that are going to come around. So I encourage you to just kind of play around in this tool and see what you can come up with. Okay, I'll cancel that. And then again, going to play with one more shape here, which is a polygon. So I'm going to click and drag the polygon out. And actually, I'm just going to click because I want to choose something with more sides. I'll choose 6. Okay, I'm going to drag this to the center, just scale it up a little bit. Then I'm going to select it and go back to my transform tool. Then let's play around with the hexagon. Okay, I'm going to choose 97 again. And a lot of times I think just a little bit of rotation looks really good. So you can see this is a pretty cool effect. I'm getting sort of these folds. And this is happening because the rotation is pretty similar to the scaling in that the vertexes are kind of lining up on each other and they're stacking up and creating almost a shading where it looks like, like the fabric of space is folding in on each other. So it looks really cool and interesting. Okay, and the more copies I make, the more rotation is going to happen. Okay, so let's go ahead and do just 50 copies. And then I also want to show you that any change I make to this original shape is going to reflect everything else. So, of course, if I just change the color, it's going to change the color of everything else. I can also, apply some sort of gradient to this outside shape. So let's say I wanted to, make it a gradient. Oops, that's not what I want to do. First select the stroke because I want to apply the gradient to the stroke, and then go ahead and click the gradient. So if I wanted to create, some kind of gradient, maybe, kind of a gradient between a blue color and sort of a magenta color. Okay, that is going to apply to all the subsequent shapes that are inside. And you can do different types of gradients to create different effects. Or some kind of radial gradient would work as well. Okay. The other thing that you could do is actually edit the shape itself. So if I took my pen tool, or excuse me, my direct select tool, and edited one of these points, it's going to edit all the points inside as well. Okay, so this technique is not just for perfect geometric shapes, it's also for any random shape you're working with. So again, you could do this with a leaf shape, you could do it with any shape you want. Okay, I'm going to undo that. You could also use this little handle to round the corners of the hexagon and just give it a little more smoothness. Okay, and you can see now everything kind of has that same roundness. So to finish off this assignment, we're going to go ahead and give this a background color and overlay some typography on it. For this exercise, you're welcome to do anything you want, as long as it's some sort of interesting, complex geometric pattern, and you're using, the step and technique tools, or the transform effect. You're welcome to do it in any size you want. So in this case, I'm going to choose kind of a square-shaped artboard, since my design is pretty square-shaped. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring down those sides. And then I'll make my design a little bigger, so it kind of fits into that shape. We'll bring the artboard a little in. There we go. Okay, and then let's give this a background color. So I'm going to get rid of this stroke, and I think some sort of dark background color would look good here, maybe like a dark blue. I'm going to hit Command Shift and open bracket. That's going to send it to the back. Could also do that by going up to Object and Arrange, send to back. Okay, it's going to put it behind my design. Let's tune these colors a little bit. I'm not convinced that this is the perfect color. So if I shift click on this little swatch and then double click here on the fill, that's another way to bring up the color picker. You can also do the same thing by clicking down here. Let's go a little bit more muted. I find a lot of times muted colors are actually a little bit more visually pleasing. Okay, there we go. It looks a little dark. Let's go just a little bit lighter. Okay, so you could play around with this more and get the exact effect you want. Maybe we even want to bring our shape down so we have more kind of white space and we can really appreciate the, the fullness of the shape. Last thing I'm going to do is overlay some text on this. And this is optional. This is just kind of if you want to create more layers to your design. So I'm going to grab the type tool. Again, I'm going to take away the stroke. And I'll go with white type since my shape is dark. I think white type is going to look best. And I'll click to just sort of add a word. And I'll add the word dive, since this is really feeling like I'm falling into the spiral. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to choose white and choose some kind of font. I'll go with Gotham, one of my favorites. Okay. And then since this is point type, I can just go ahead and scale it up, increase the tracking. And a shortcut to increase the tracking is holding down Option and then just clicking the horizontal arrow keys. So if I click the right arrow key, it's going to increase the tracking. If I click the left arrow key, it's going to decrease the tracking. This obviously only works if you have a piece of text selected. Okay, so I'm going to increase that tracking. Just sort of put that in the middle of the design. Okay, so that's it. Make sure to play around with all the different possibilities here. There's a lot of things you can do with these tools, and it's a great way to just create some really interesting, complex stuff in a very quick way. So good luck, and look forward to see what you all come up with.